The purpose of this video is to present the history of North Star Historic Conservancy through the recollections of the people responsible for its creation. We'll start with an introduction and the roles of the participants.
I was the primary planner for Robinson and Amarillo when they owned the North Star property, and then for Sandy Sanderson when he owned the property, and I introduced him to the land trust.
I was the founding executive director of the Nevada County Land Trust at the time. So I was the ED when all of these acquisition and transfer issues were going on. And then in 2012, I joined the board of the North Star House and served as board member, treasurer, and general do whatever until 2018.
At one point, the president of the Nevada County Land Trust, and also became the first president of the Conservancy, because I had the pleasure of drafting the Articles of Incorporation as an attorney. So that was my initial involvement with the House, and spinning it out from the ownership from the Land Trust into the separate entity.
I'm an architect. I was a co-founder of the Nevada County Land Trust, and I was on that for 10 years. And I was very fortunate to know a lady by the name of Peggy Levine, who invited me over one day to look at this very interesting piece of architecture. And I walked up to the house, and that was my first glimpse of the building, and I fell in love with it. When the North Star Historic Conservancy was formed, I resigned from the board of the Land Trust and later joined the board of the Conservancy, and been acting as site architect since then.
And I was on the staff of the Land Trust when the house was acquired. And then later on, I joined the board of the North Star House. For 8 years, I was involved with marketing and being the secretary.
I became interested and involved with the North Star House in about 2010. Mostly being pushed by David Wright. There's a lot of people who came on the board around 2012, I believe, and served in many roles. Enjoyed my time for about 8 years being on the board. Got to meet a lot of incredible people.
What was your initial impression of the house?
It was a mess. It was structurally starting to deteriorate, had been brutally vandalized, additions and remodeling made that were just totally inappropriate with the grandeur of this building as it was originally meant to be. That had good bones, and that it definitely had a pedigree.
Stunning. Cheryl and I walked through a tarp by the kitchen back door, and you could hardly tell it was a kitchen. We went through the house and saw paintball on the walls. The fireplaces had been attacked by hammers. It was just, first and second floor was just a mess. It was hard to see the possibility of the house with all the destruction. How was the land and house transferred to the Land Trust?
North Star Mining Properties was around 750 acres. Inside the boundaries, why there were a lot of separate legal parcels that had been created by mining patents and various transactions over the years. Doing research for Sanderson, why we figured out in the vicinity of the house where there were some legal parcels that we could work with. And I believe you're right that initially Sanderson deeded over a larger parcel, and then we worked to refine that later through a lot line adjustment to rearrange the property lines to create the parcel that's here today.
The Land Trust needed funding for the house, and an application was made to the county for funding from the Dryden Wilson Bequest Fund. This was a complicated process that took almost a year to accomplish. A grant of $508,000 was awarded.
Critical thing was we had to have the money because the roof was failing. We were fortunate to have people with a shared vision, enough people with a shared vision on the board of supervisors, so we were able to get the grant. And that was just critical because there was no way our organization could have raised that money.
That was where I really started to get involved as a planning, from a planning point of view. Talked a lot about what material was appropriate. Wooden shingles and shakes were not legal in the code, and since the building was obviously prone to fire destruction, we decided to use concrete shakes. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I did was I contacted the National Park Service and asked if we were going to be restoring this building, if that was appropriate. And they did. They said yes.
The land trust was deeded the property in 2003. Can you explain why the North Star Historic Conservancy was not formed until 2006?
I was the president of the land trust, and we were continuing to have our board meetings and a lot of staff time devoted to this. Even if it's within the mission statement, there were many board members who felt it was not the sort of natural conservation that we should be engaged in at the land trust. Between the animosity that was being created and the amount of time and the inherent risks for a building of this type and age, it was determined by the board that we spin this out into a totally separate entity. That's why at that time I created the Articles of Incorporation and did all the documentation. I applied to the IRS for the 501c3 status, just documented that.
The board of the Conservancy.
I was the president. John Taylor was vice president or secretary, and Ron Mathis was the treasurer.
Were Ron and John also on the board of the land trust?
We had what would be considered interlocking boards, but eventually they left the land trust board. I left the North Star board.
What were the priorities for rehabilitation of the house, and who made those decisions?
It's called the North Star House Focused Rehabilitation
Yeah.
Plan. It was done by the Architectural Alliance, a resource group in San Francisco.
And there was a three-step approach. Land trust, or the Conservancy in its infancy, was following through in the first, the demolition phase, remove all the non-period pieces. The second was the mothball phase, you called it, to basically encompass the house, to seal the house. And then the third was to start the restoration, and particularly on the structural side.
Then we actually did a master plan, which was required for the use permit, and that showed, we looked at parking and circulation and landscaping and infrastructure, all the utilities and everything, and that was a wonderful document that was created that allowed Joe then to take that to the county and say, hey, we know what we're doing.
There were a lot of donations and volunteers. How did you get them?
There were a lot of weekends that there were a lot of volunteers out here. Ron Mathis with his tractor having a ball, tearing things down with landscaping and that sort of thing. And John Taylor burning things. A lot of good people spent a lot of time and a lot of effort.
Word of mouth, and once Peggy got involved, Peggy just
Yeah.
knew everybody.
Right.
Her enthusiasm was like a magnet, really, and she'd draw people. All of our networking in the land trust, we had volunteers that worked on projects and said, oh, I want to work on that too. We had the money for a project manager. Then the work parties could become more focused, and that was with Bruce Conklin.
Tell us about the transfer of the property in 2015.
The agreement that was transferring the property from the land trust to the Conservancy had a number of provisions. That the transfer only could occur unless certain measures or milestones were met. And you had to have $1 million worth of volunteer service or labor. You had to have a master plan for the property that detailed all the uses and activities. We had to have a business and marketing plan, and we had to give the land trust $10. Those are pretty high bars for, a fairly young board to achieve, but we met all those. And one thing the board, the land trust board wanted, I thought was a very good idea, was to have some type of deed restrictions on the property that ensured this house would never convert to a commercial use.
Nobody can write deed restrictions like two planners, so Joe and I got together and came up with something that kind of put everybody at ease about the future.
Initially, the emphasis of the Conservancy was to save the house and property for the community. What was your initial vision for North Star House, and has it changed? I didn't have any vision at that point. But as the years have gone on, being on the board for 8 years, it seemed that it would be somehow fitting in with the arts community in a big way. And certainly it's a historical site, but how can the upstairs be best utilized and complement somehow the events that take place?
There wasn't a lot of vision. We started planning and trying to figure out, we started looking at things that we could do.
I am practical to death. And my whole thought was, how could this place become sustainable? I have been so pleased to see how the historical lectures and programs have expanded. I was afraid those would die. I've been very pleased to see how they have expanded and continued. So the idea of making it a cultural center is great.
I first saw it, my only vision or wish was that it be protected. That was about it. And I just always want a community to embrace and display its history as much as it can, and to make it strong. Cultural event center that would be the best in the community and draw every type of event, every type of activity, and be open to all.
From high school in the 60s, this was Granny Guggenheim's place. At least the grounds are where you took a girl to scare her into your arms. Said I didn't have vision. Didn't think this was a land trust project, so I didn't think too far beyond that. Every time I come here, I'm just completely blown away with how beautiful it is and how much has been done, and it's just been a wonderful thing.
Again, I'm a little bit like Andy. I didn't have a great vision when I first saw it because my focus was on the land trust side. The more time that I spent here, the more I did fall in love with the property. And the restoration that has occurred so far has been amazing.
Thank you all very much. It has been so informative listening to your recollections of North Star House.